Hello, my name is Jennifer Cohn. I'm an election security advocate and attorney, and I'm here today with my friend Don Siegelman, who is the former governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and attorney general of Alabama. Hi, Don.
Hello there.
How are
Good to be
you?
with you
Oh, it's good to see
again.
you. I know. Sorry about that. It's great to see you. So I was excited and eager to get your insights about the upcoming election. You have, unfortunately for you, a lot of experience working or dealing with Karl Rove, who is their Republican operative that worked in the Bush administration. And I'm excited to get you to share your thoughts. So can you tell me what you are thinking of as we head into November?
Well, I'm thinking that the Democrats need to be prepared. They need to be prepared for unparalleled chaos at the polls. There is going to be more hell raised by Republicans. There are going to be attempts to intimidate Black and Hispanic Latino voters. There is going to be cries of election fraud. There's going to be challenges based on signatures. There will be challenges based on improper photo IDs. Whatever you can imagine, Republicans will be prepared. They will be at every polling place, and they will be at the courthouses where absentee votes will be opened and counted. We Democrats go into this election with the advantage that Democrats are fired up and they're going to be voting in unprecedented numbers. The disadvantage is that they're going to be voting at unparalleled levels of absentee ballots. Democrats are three times more likely to cast an absentee ballot than Republicans, which means that in many cases, the deadline for announcing the vote on election day will have passed before the absentee votes are counted. Many of them will be counted after the election, and it could be well after any deadlines are set. So that as a practical matter, the Electoral College is going to meet in December. I think it's the 18th of December. And so we've got several deadlines to meet in counting these absentee ballots. But the Democrats not only need to be prepared for the absentee ballots, they need to be prepared for hacking as well, because it should be expected and anticipated that it will not just be Russians and Iran and China who may be trying to influence the outcome of this election, but your local Republicans, or an organized attempt, either at a state or national level, to penetrate electronic machinery and to hack the vote in certain places. It may not be just in the presidential race, it may be in legislative races.
My God. Okay, so we have to be prepared to address both challenges to absentee ballots while keeping our eye on the potential for hacking, both by foreign agents and by possibly corrupt insiders.
And let me, Jennifer, if I may, you
Sure.
asked me a question about, and you specifically named Karl Rove.
Yes.
I probably have as much or more experience in dealing with Karl Rove and battling him than anybody that I know of, certainly. But it started back after the '92 presidential campaign, when the Bush Quayle campaign was defeated by Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And Rove came to Alabama to take over the Alabama Supreme Court on behalf of rich businessmen, which he did. But in 1994, he stole his first state Supreme Court race by challenging absentee ballots from primarily Democratic controlled areas. And it threw the election into chaos. The state's Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Democrat, but Rove got it in front of a federal judge who then threw out the absentee ballots on technicalities. They should have been counted, and the Republican was elected. So, or was declared the winner. Specifically with regard to hacking, I also have some experience there, because my 2002 re-election campaign was hacked. I was declared the winner the night of the election. And then overnight, in this in the secrecy of the courthouse, where no poll watchers or Democrats or Republicans or media was present, the vote was changed, and 6,200 of my votes were subtracted from my total. Didn't affect a single down ballot race. My Republican opponent was declared the winner, and the state attorney general, who was Karl Rove's client, seized the ballots and all related election material, went to Montgomery and participated with the Secretary of State, also a Republican, in illegally certifying my Republican opponent as the winner. We were in a catch-22 because we could not present an election contest without having access to the ballots, and the Attorney General would not give those to anyone.
My God. Do you remember who the vendor was in your race that was hacked?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you remember the name of the vendor that was involved in your case that was hacked?
Did you say the number?
The name of the vendor?
Well, the name of the company, of the electronic company?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was EES or
ES&S?
ES&S, yes.
That's what I was remembering from the versus the
the night of the election, the first ballots that came in that were certified, the certification which NBC, ABC, CBS, and AP used to declare me as the winner was received by the state Republican Party chairman, Marty Connors. Sitting across the table from him was Kitty McCullough, who was second in command with Karl Rove at the Bush White House. And they put in a call to the Republican probate judge of Baldwin County. And immediately thereafter, a second certification was issued, which simply subtracted 6,200 votes from me and threw the election to the Republican. My point in raising that is not to talk about the fact that my election was stolen, but to emphasize that if this can happen in a governor's race, it can happen in a presidential race or in a race for local legislative representative. And this is not necessarily something that requires a great deal of sophistication. So, Democrats should be on guard for, they've got to be prepared not only for chaos, not only for challenging, being prepared to meet the challenge of absentee votes, but also for staying on top of anticipated Democratic votes down to the precinct level so that they can see if there is an anomaly that needs to be dug into to find out if the vote was hacked in that particular race.
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree with that. And so the deduction of votes from your total, that was in a Republican county, is that right?
It was and is a Republican county. All three election officials, probate judge, sheriff, and circuit clerk, who appoint all the election officials, are Republicans, yes.
And it was just one precinct that they deducted the votes from? And
it was one precinct, so it would have been a simple matter to do a hand recount, and that's what I asked for, saying that all we need to do is hand count this one precinct, then we'll know who the real winner of this election is. The fact that they wouldn't allow a recount, the fact that it was the Republican state attorney general, who was Karl Rove's client, that seized the ballots, the fact that he said anybody that touches these ballots is going to jail, ought to give someone a hint that there was something that they were trying to protect. What they were trying to protect was that they had hacked this election and did not want it revealed publicly.
There were also some Republican operatives who said they had received training from the vendor. Is that correct?
One of the workers for the staff members of my opponent, I think he may have been the chief of staff at one point, Dan Gans, claimed that he had been trained by the vendor in ballot security and held himself out as a ballot security expert. He actually, when he went to work for a Tom DeLay and Jack Abramoff related lobbying firm, the Alexandria Group, claimed on their website that he was the one responsible for swinging the election from me to the Republican Bob Riley.
My God. Okay. So in terms of being on guard against shenanigans with the absentee ballots, by which I mean bogus challenges, what do you recommend that the Democrats do there?
Well, we know that the Republicans are well prepared. They're pulling out the stops, asking for volunteers, lawyers. They're going to have, in my judgment, they're going to have either retired law enforcement officers or off-duty officers, people on the streets at polling places, and they're going to have lawyers present at each polling place to challenge voters as they come in, challenging their voter IDs, challenging their signature. But it's going to be a massive effort to disqualify Democrats at the polls. The same thing is going to go on when the absentee votes are being challenged. They're going to challenge, again, the voter's signature, whether or not they have it properly verified or attested to. Even in the past, they have successfully challenged votes, absentee votes, when a voter put Scotch tape on an envelope to seal their ballot instead of licking the envelope and sealing it that way. They're going to be looking for anything that they can challenge a Democratic absentee vote on. And Democrats simply need to be prepared for this kind of chaos and level of challenge that the Republicans have bragged about and are prepared to execute on Election Day.
There's also an element, I think, of deflection that goes on with this long-standing attempt by the Republican Party to focus so much and exaggerate so much the threat of individual voters committing fraud, which is known as voter fraud. So that would be like double voting. And you and I talked a little bit earlier about how that can be used as a smokescreen for other things. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I think they raised the cry of voter fraud, knowing that they've been doing this for months now. Trump has been saying the only way you can lose is if the election is rigged, and if you vote by mail, it's a way to steal the election. Of course, he votes by mail, and so does Attorney General Barr. But very rarely is an election influenced by voter fraud, where individual voters try to vote twice or even go out and recruit a vote from their neighbor or something. But where voter fraud takes place is when elections are hacked, when you steal 6,200 votes in one whack or one hack.
Right.
And so we Democrats have to be prepared for the challenge that lies ahead.
Right. So voter fraud then being the notion that individual voters might cheat. That's what the GOP wants to demonize individual voters and cry voter fraud. Well, using that to an extent to deflect from election fraud, which would be like by corrupt insiders and hackers. And that's a real pattern, I think, that has gone on.
Well,
probably
it has,
a decade.
It has gone on, and Democrats hopefully this election are thinking about it. Although I cannot say that they're not thinking about it. I just haven't heard them talk to state party chairmen saying, be on the lookout for precincts that produce an anomaly, that show that something has got to be wrong here. That kind of shocking impact where you can then assume that the election has been hacked and then dig into it and to find out if in fact it was hacked.
Right. I hope that they will be looking for those things. I know election security advocates will be looking for them, but they do not have the same resources as the Democratic Party or the Biden-Harris campaign. Let's talk a little bit about voter intimidation, because this is another tactic used by the Republican Party.
Well, and it has been used, since this country was founded. Indians couldn't vote, slaves couldn't, freedmen, slaves couldn't vote, and women couldn't vote until 1919. When blacks were finally given the right to vote, there were efforts to intimidate and to suppress the black vote. It was not uncommon for states to engage in sort of a hide and seek way of allowing people to register to vote. They would say, okay, yeah, blacks can register, but we're not going to tell you where or when to show up in order to register to vote. So in Alabama, they would have maybe 2 hours on Monday from 8 to 10, and then Wednesday from 3 to 5, or they might not show up at all one week. And so blacks would take off work and go to the courthouse thinking that they might get registered, and there wouldn't be anybody there. Or if there were there, then they had to pass a literacy test. And when they then they came up with the poll tax, and now they've come up with gerrymandering, which is also another way to steal our democracy. So it's we've got to be prepared for all of those things. And Republicans are going to have a massive effort to try to rewrite the United States Constitution, and so that they can have a free rein on, again, developing ways to suppress Democratic votes and to ensure a Republican majority.
I'm glad you brought up state races. This is something that I think doesn't get enough attention, and I in particular am concerned about possible hacking and other types of election theft of state races, because I think people don't look at them as much. And let's talk about that just a little bit more. So state legislatures are going to be voting on the new maps in 2021 that will decide the control of the House of Representatives, and that has to do with gerrymandering. And can you explain those concepts a little bit?
Well, we've seen it happen before. I mean, when Republicans have, at least from my standpoint as a Democrat, I've seen it happen where a Republican-controlled legislature will produce a congressional district that is less favorable to a Democrat and more favorable to a Republican. I worked for Allard Lowenstein in New York, who got elected on Long Island in 1968, only to find that after being on Nixon's enemies list, the Republican legislature gerrymandered his district so that in the next election in 1970, it was impossible for him to win re-election. So this is the way, this is part of their plan. It's not, when they gerrymander an election, it's stealing our democracy. When they threaten voters and they turn people away from the polls, it's stealing our democracy. When they refuse to count valid absentee ballots, they're stealing our democracy. So we just got to be on guard for, electronic hacking, as well as other means such as gerrymandering, which is just another way of stealing an election.
And the way that they are able to pull this off to a large extent is by having their operatives in the state legislatures. Is that right? So
yeah, they have to have control of the state legislature in order to control the drawing of the maps for the new congressional districts, and that they will redraw the state house districts and state senate districts, and then they will redraw the congressional districts. So it has a huge impact who we elect to our local legislative to represent us locally in the state legislature has a huge ripple effect, not just in our one political subdivision, but throughout the whole state and the whole country.
Right. You had mentioned to me before something that Jeff Sessions did along the lines of voter intimidation. I was hoping you could tell me about that again.
Well, in 1991, there was a case, I think it was out of New Jersey, where the Republicans had used law enforcement, deputy sheriffs or sheriffs and law enforcement off duty with guns and walkie-talkies to intimidate Black voters into not voting. They would have signs saying, if you violate the law, you're going to go to jail. Well, Jeff Sessions went one step further when he was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama. He rounded up, literally, busloads of African-American activists, political activists, and took them to the federal courthouse in Montgomery and had them fingerprinted and photographed, and then lectured and told them if he caught them again in any kind of voter fraud situation, they were going to be prosecuted. And he then went on to prosecute two elderly ladies, Maggie Bozeman and Julia Wilder, who was at that time was a 72-year-old retired school teacher, for absentee voter fraud when they had simply been engaged in trying to encourage people to vote an absentee ballot, not actually engaged in absentee vote fraud.
Oh my goodness. All right. I was hoping we could also discuss a little bit the Breonna Taylor situation, and if you have any suggestions about how to prevent some of the injustices that we are seeing there right now.
Well, yes, I do. And this has been studied and discussed, and articles have been written about it. There have been untold hours of television coverage of not just on Breonna Taylor, but on the other Tamar Rice, the 12-year-old who was shot just seconds after the police arrived, or the strangulation of Eric Gardner in New York, and Rashard Brooks in Atlanta, and the list goes on. But the reason why indictments generally do not flow when a police officer kills a Black is because prosecutors and police view themselves as wearing the same uniform. They're part of the same team. So prosecutors generally protect police from indictments. And the way to cure this is to ensure that the family members of a victim of police violence have the right to have a lawyer present in a grand jury, as a check on truth, but two, take Breonna Taylor's case. We don't know that the grand jurors may have been all Klansmen. They may have been all Trump supporters. They may have been all the husbands and wives of police officers. So you have to have a lawyer there to voir dire, to ask questions of the potential jurors to ensure that there is a racially balanced and neutral jury that's going to be looking at the allegations of police abuse of power. Finally, that lawyers should have the right to object to proposed evidence and testimony by the government and to submit evidence and testimony of his own. And the arbiter of these two conflicting offers of evidence and testimony would be a judge. Just as in a civil deposition, a judge makes a decision as to what evidence and testimony can be introduced. It should be that same due process should be provided where somebody's life is at issue in a grand jury.
I agree. That's great advice. Is this something that's discussed in your book, which, by the way, I forgot again to mention in the introduction? Tell us about your book.
Well, my book, Stealing Our Democracy, is of course, about about my situation, but it's not about me. It's about saving our democracy and preserving our democracy. And I offer up ways to balance the scales of justice, to change our criminal justice system, to ensure that people who are targeted by a prosecutor at least have a fair chance of proving they're innocent if they indeed are. And you know, I underscore this Breonna Taylor case because this is one of the things I actually been talking about this since I was Attorney General. When I was Attorney General of Alabama back in the 1980s, I proposed a constitutional amendment to give victims the right to have a lawyer present in the grand jury. So this is not a new issue to me. And it's a simple solution to the problem that we've seen over and over again. What would have happened if Benjamin Crump, the lawyer for Trayvon Martin, if he had been allowed to be in the grand jury? I think we'd have had a different result. I think that man, George Zimmerman, would have been charged with murder. The same is true in so many other cases. So the answer is not complicated. Allow victims to have a lawyer in the grand jury.
Again, I think that's a great suggestion, great insight. And I also think a lot of people have been activated and, motivated to march about this police brutality and killing of Black people by police officers. There's a little bit, even an element of, first they came for the protesters and I said nothing. Because I honestly think if, God forbid, Trump wins re-election, and I certainly am hoping he will not, and I'm doing everything I can to try to ensure that he does not. But if he does, there is definitely, I think, a heightened risk of political prosecutions, by which I mean not just even direct political opponents, but members of the public who oppose his policies and who have large followings and vocal followings. And I'm very concerned about that. And, you yourself was the victim of a political prosecution. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, let me just say, if I'd had a lawyer in the grand jury when the prosecutors were both presenting false evidence and presenting false testimony, and withholding exculpatory evidence, I would have never been indicted. My whole life would have taken on a different turn. The same is true with a young African-American who's picked up on with a small amount of cocaine or marijuana. If they had been afforded the right to have a lawyer present in the grand jury, so many people would not have ended up in prison. I think it's a way to impact mass incarceration as well as to ensure justice on behalf of the victims of police violence. I love the fact that we have so many people marching on the street, but I wish they would be advocating for equal justice under the law. Why should the government be the only one presenting evidence in a grand jury? Why shouldn't the family member be there to ensure that the government is telling the truth to these jurors? So, we provide this method of due process in civil cases where monetary damages are at stake. So surely, if it's important enough to ensure this safeguard takes place where monetary damages are at stake, surely this safeguard of due process ought to be applied when someone's life is at stake.
Absolutely. To put it mildly, it's a power imbalance, and that's sort of enshrined in the way that we handle criminal proceedings. Just for those who are not familiar with your story, I wanted to point out that it was the wife of your political opponent in Alabama. What was his name again?
Well, my prosecutor was the U.S. attorney who was the wife of my campaign opponents, my Republican opponents. He was my Republican opponent's campaign manager. So
that's
my
right.
Republican opponent's campaign manager was a husband of the U.S. attorney who was investigating me and trying to ensure that I was prosecuted.
And there was a Republican whistleblower who felt bad about what they were doing, and she came forward and
We actually had three Republican whistleblowers.
wow.
A lawyer who was hired by my Republican opponent to do negative research came forward and told the truth. A Republican paralegal who worked for the prosecution came forward and told the truth. And another Republican lawyer had been a lawyer for the Republican National Committee in Alabama also came forward and talked about this conspiracy to see that the criminal justice system was going to be manipulated to ensure that I did not get reelected as governor.
And it's a good.
It's all covered in my book, Stealing Our Democracy.
Yeah, yeah.
But the heart of the reform that I talk about in Stealing Our Democracy, oddly enough, is the changing the grand jury system. It's something I am passionate about. It's something I'm going to spend the rest of my life on if I have to. I've already contacted members of Congress, pleading with them to please call me as a witness on, to talk about the need for criminal justice reform, but not just to talk about it, but to offer solutions, simple solutions that can ensure that justice is meted out more fairly.
I think it's really important that that occurs. It may be that we will have more luck as some of the younger stars in the Democratic Party rise up, because unfortunately some of the more senior members saw your situation and chose to do nothing, and maybe even a little worse than nothing. Is that not everyone?
Yeah, there is a documentary about my case that's it's free on Amazon if you happen to have, if you're an Amazon Prime member, but it's called Atticus versus the Architect, and Atticus being me, and the architect being Karl Rove. But it goes through how the prosecution was laid out by Republicans as a means to not only take over the Democratic Party and take over the state government in Alabama by eliminating Democrats, but to ensure that I wasn't on the scene to challenge George W. Bush in 2004.
And it also addresses what happened on election night during your race for re-election, where the 6,200 votes disappeared.
Yeah, very clearly.
Yeah, that documentary, it had been recommended to me a number of times, and it took me a while before I got around to watching it. And it's one of those things that it forever changed the way that I look at our country, and unfortunately not in a positive way. It was, it's quite devastating actually, but I think it's incredibly important, because if we want to be the kind of country that maybe I thought we were, and that many people thought we were, but we are not, you have to go in with open eyes, and you have to know what the threats are, and who are the people that represent the threats, and those kinds of things. And so, yes, it absolutely changed my perspective on everything. And
the documentary was done by an independent filmmaker, Steve Wimberly, and I have no interest in it. I have no financial interest in the documentary, but I will say that it is truthful and it is shocking. I think anybody that watches it will become concerned not only about the hacking of elections, but the use of the justice system to silence people with whom those in power disagree.
yes, and unfortunately, this was done, largely by the George W. Bush administration, specifically Karl Rove. But there certainly were plenty of willing operatives that were joining with him.
But it's been ramped up under the Trump administration.
Exactly.
By his manipulation of the people in control of the Department of Justice.
Oh, and we should say Rove is working with, maybe we did already, but Rove is working with Trump.
I'm not sure we covered that, but Rove and Trump were on opposite sides in 2016, both of them calling each other moron, one being a moron, one being an idiot. And now Trump has summoned Rove to the White House, and Rove is now leading the organization to ensure that Democratic votes are suppressed and absentee votes are challenged and thrown out. He's also got his buddy who should be in prison, Ralph Reed, who is was the founder and president of the bogus organization, the Christian Coalition, who's now founded another organization, Faith and something or other, but he's out trying to do the exact same thing to whip up the white evangelicals, to organize them and get them to turn out en masse to vote for Trump.
I wonder a little bit if there's some Stockholm syndrome going on with Karl Rove, because he did oppose Trump. I don't know that he was really a never Trumper exactly, but there was, I mean, Russia did hack some old emails kept on the Smart Tech server in Tennessee, and Smart Tech hosted all of the Bush administration's private emails, 22 million of them that were conveniently disappeared when they were subpoenaed by the Democrats, but then reappeared later. And yeah, they didn't release those. For the most part, they didn't release the emails that they hacked from the RNC and Republicans, and that, you know,
well, it's interesting.
The emails were on the Smart Tech server. I don't know if Russia has them or not, but I just wonder, he certainly seems to relish helping Trump now. So that's why I say Stockholm syndrome. I almost wonder if he was, you know, wouldn't it be a shame if these emails came out and then, you know, captors often end out losing, they end out embracing, captives often end out embracing their captors. It's just sort of a weird psychological phenomenon.
One of the last legal challenges that I mounted all the way to the Supreme Court was the fact that we had discovered that the lead prosecutor investigating me was in email communication with my Republican opponent's campaign manager. And it should be kept in mind that the prosecutor was then working for the state attorney general, who was Karl Rove's client.
Right.
We were seeking discovery to look at the other emails that the government had but would not turn over. While we had some expression of sympathy by a federal district court judge in Georgia, we never were able to get a ruling favorable so that we could look at those emails. Jennifer, I'm going to have to run. So
okay.
I appreciate you and wish you the very best. We should say one thing about the debate tonight.
Yes. Yes.
If there is, you know, justice and fairness in the world, Joe Biden will be presented as a man of compassion, caring, someone who believes in this country, someone who is not a bully, but one not to be bullied. And Trump will come over as a bully and a buffoon, and it will backfire on Trump. And the election will be decided on election night with an overwhelming vote for Joe Biden. So with that, I'm going to say Saranada.
All right. It's great talking to you. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
I'm going to get prepared for a debate watch party.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, enjoy. Fingers crossed. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Did you record?